Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Indie Zone. My name is Kathy. On the afternoon of the 21st of February 2025, a certified copy of the redacted transcript in Idaho versus Kohberger from the January 23rd, 2025 hearing commencing at 9 o'clock a.m. before the Honorable Stephen J. Hippler dropped. It is a 175-page document. This is the first time that the public is getting a look at what happened during this closed, sealed hearing. This document is very long. It's 175 pages in total. The stenographer's name is at the bottom of page 1. This is the cover sheet. Her name is Christy, it looks like Valsich, and those are her credentials as a certified court reporter. She is who took down word for word, verbatim, as Judge Hippler ordered in his late January 2025 hearing. Let's look at page 2. This tells us who the appearances were. Who was there behind closed doors on behalf of the state? William W. Thompson Jr., Ashley Jennings from the Latah County Prosecutor's Office. They, of course, have jurisdiction over this proceeding because the horrendous crimes occurred in Latah County. Even though venue transferred, they are still the lead prosecuting agency. Assisted by the Office of the Attorney General, Jeffrey D. Nye. So it's 3 attorneys for the state, for the defense, Ann C. Taylor of Ann Taylor Law, Jay Logston, Idaho State Public Defender, and Alyssa G. Massoth, attorney at law. The next page gives us the index, where you go if you're interested in hearing, let's say, Detective Brett Payne's testimony, his direct. This would be by the defense, then the cross by the state, and then redirect examination. It begins on page 7 and runs through 34. And then the rest of the witnesses, for example, Riley Nolan was the second person called. We now know her direct examination began at page 37. And then we see other witnesses who appeared. What we're going to do is we're going to break up this transcript into parts. I want to take some time right now looking at Detective Payne's testimony, the questions that were asked of him and how he testified. To do so, we have to go to page 7. The first few pages, we see that the closed proceedings, the court called the proceedings to order. He says, let's go on the record in State versus Kohberger. He gives the case number, and then he says present in the courtroom. He asks for the appearances. Then for the next few pages, you can certainly read it. There's some background information. There's some discussion about the exhibits and so forth. We go to page 7, and then we see that Detective Payne was called as a defense witness. Now, I saw that on page 2 of the transcript, and I thought, is this an error? Nope, it is not. It is the defense, Mr. Kohberger, who called Detective Brett Payne to the stand at this hearing. And it begins by, after the court said, you may call your first witness. Why does the defense go first? It's their motion. This is their motion to suppress IgG DNA, and also there was some testimony taken for a potential Franks hearing. We know now that both were denied, but this is why defense goes first. She then proceeds, this is Ms. Taylor, Your Honor, the defense will call Brett Payne, and then we see the clerk swearing in. He's got to swear under penalty of perjury that he will tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth, which he does. And then once that's done, Ms. Taylor begins with the questioning. Page 7, line 11. May I approach the podium, Your Honor? She says, yes, please. And then Detective Payne, having been solely sworn, testifies as follows. That's the court reporter providing some input. Direct examination by Ms. Taylor. Good morning, good morning. Will you state your full name? And he does. And we go on to the next page. What do you do for a living? He says, I'm Detective Corporal Moscow PD currently. And then she gets some background questions as to how long he's been Moscow PD. What did he do before? You post certified. Then we get to page 16. In the course of your responsibilities with Moscow police, were you handling an investigation involving homicides at 1122 King Road? He responds, yes, ma'am. What was your role? He says, I was assigned lead detective after about 24 hours in the case. Now, here we see at lines 21 and 22, verification. There was some sort of rumors, innuendo going out there that Detective Payne came on later on, that it was another detective who quit or left, these types of things. We see here that Detective Payne was basically from the start of the investigation designated that he would be the lead detective. And we see that confirmation here, lines 21 and 22. Now she asks, that's Ms. Taylor, does that mean that you have responsibility for the case and the evidence? And he states, yes, ma'am. So he has bottom line responsibility. Moscow Police Department is the lead agency in this case, because these horrendous crimes at 1122 King Road occurred in Moscow. And the Moscow Police Department, first arriving agency, they invited in the Idaho State Police and the feds to help. But Moscow Police, lead agency, and Detective Payne, we now have confirmation he has responsibility for the case. That is Idaho versus Kohberger and the evidence. We go on to page 9. Okay, as such, did you participate in a search for the suspect? Yes, ma'am, Mr. Payne responds. And when was the first time you heard Brian Kohberger's name? He gives us the answer here under oath at line 6. The first time I heard Brian Kohberger's name was December 19th, 2022, and now he gives the background as to how this happened. When Ms. Taylor asks, and what was that a result of? And he responds, that was a result of investigative genetic genealogy that was being undertaken by the feds. We had a phone call that evening, so now we learn that it was the evening of December 19th, 2022, when the Moscow Police Department received a phone call and we were told Brian Kohberger's name. Line 13. And before that, Mr. Kohberger was not on your radar, and here we have the confirmation, no ma'am. Line number 15. He was never a suspect, never a person of interest, not even on the Moscow Police Department's radar, as testified to by Detective Brett Payne. Now we go on to the next line. Before December 19th, was the Fed's cast team member collated with you? Yes, ma'am. How long had he been with you? I don't remember exactly, but it had been several weeks at that point. Was that Nicholas Balance? And Detective Payne says yes. What other members of the feds were with you? She asked at the bottom of at the bottom of line 25. This is page 10. We're going into the next page. Goodness. Line 2. Detective Payne responds, a lot. We had a technical assistant, and he names a couple of people here, and numerous other special agents that were there to assist. Line 5, by the time it was December 19th and you first heard of Brian Kohberger's name, had you reviewed videotapes? He says yes. How many hours of videotapes do you think you reviewed? He responds, I don't remember, a lot. I can't give you an accurate representation. Line 13, in those videotapes, did you focus in on any particular ones that were of interest to you? Detective Payne then responds, yes, ma'am. In particular would be are you talking about addresses that were? How would you like me to refer to them? She responds, how you nicknamed the cameras. Okay, now we see where the cameras are located for the first time we're given this information. Line 19, page number 10. So the first one was from 1112 King Road. It was a surveillance camera, an exterior surveillance camera on a house that was immediately to the northeast of 1122 King Road. There was some footage from a Linda Lane camera. I forget the address off the top of my head. There was footage from the A&W, which is at the corner of Louder and South Main. This is the bottom of page 10. We're going to go on to page 11, line 1, or Highway 95. There was footage from an address on Indian Hills. There was also footage from a Ridge Road camera. And that's how we referred to them, was basically by those names. Ms. Taylor then goes on, line 5. With those references in mind and keeping December 19th in mind, which of those cameras were you focused on before you learned of Brian Kohberger's name? Detective Payne responds, line 9. I would say all of them were of importance before that. Line 11, she asks, and it was later that other cameras became important, is that right? Detective Payne responds, those were the main ones we relied upon for vehicles in particular, is what those ones were. Next question, line 15. I'm going to return to that in just a minute, but I want to talk to you about interviews. Did you interview any people in relation to the case before December 19th? Line 19, yes, ma'am. And did other officers interview people? He responds, yes, ma'am. Were some of those people the roommates of the people at 1122 King? He responds, yes, ma'am. We're going on to the top of page 12. Did you review other officers' work as well? He responds, yes, ma'am. Did you have regular meetings with other officers about the status of the investigation? He responds, yes, ma'am. Did you have any role in deciding to pursue investigative genetic genealogy? Once again, Detective Payne responds at line 9, yes, ma'am. It was a collaborative decision amongst the command team to go that route, but yes, I was a part of that. Then line 12, page 12, were you a part of the discussion during the process of the identification? He responds, yes, ma'am. Were you aware that Othram Laboratories began the work on the investigative genetic genealogy? He responds, yes, ma'am. What kinds of information did you receive from Othram Laboratories? We're at page number 12, line 20. Detective Payne responds, I don't remember what was received from Othram directly. I knew they were conducting their specific type of work. I don't remember exactly what they provided to us. Line 24, did you receive some documents from them? We then go on to the next page. Yes, ma'am, Detective Payne responds. Ms. Taylor asks, okay, do you know how many documents you received from them? Detective Payne responds, I don't know. Was it one time or more than one time? He says, I don't remember. Were you part of the discussion to take the work from Othram and go into the feds? Yes, ma'am, he responds. Why was that decision made? He responds, from my understanding, granted, this is my first encounter with investigative genetic genealogy. So again, as a collaboration discussion, we decided that because the Idaho State Police Lab and Othram had essentially exhausted their resources, this is how I understand it, that we would move to the feds because they had more resources available to pursue this particular avenue. Ms. Taylor then asks, do you know what more resources the feds had? He responds, the only thing I'm privy to was that they had more databases that they could compare the sample to. That was the extent of my knowledge. Line 24, do you have familiarity with the databases and the rules that apply to those? The next page, 14, no ma'am, Detective Payne responds. Question, next question from Ms. Taylor. Line 2, I'll save those questions. What was your communications with the feds about IgG? Line 5, Detective Payne responds. So our communications were just via telephone. The sample was sent to the FBI. I don't remember the date it was given over to them. But after that, there were very few conversations, and if they happened at all, they were just telephonic advising us that the process was still in the works, and they would let us know when or if they had anything of interest for us. We are on page 14, line 13. Do you know what files or documents went to the feds from Othram? Response, I don't remember. Did you receive documents from the feds in relation to IGG? He asks. Yes, Ms. Taylor responds. Detective Payne continues, I believe after the fact, after we received Kohberger's name, we did receive documents, but I don't remember what they were. Question, do you know how many documents related to IGG you received from the feds? Answer, no ma'am. I believe as part of discovery, it was in the thousands of pages, but that's, and we continue on to the next page, the best of my knowledge. Question, thank you for that. All right, so once you have Mr. Kohberger identified, and we're continuing on with the reading on page 15. All right, so once you had Mr. Kohberger identified, what's your understanding of what that meant to have his name? Line 6, just in relation to the overall investigation. Is that? Question, yes. Answer, so the only thing that was given to us was Brian Kohberger's name. That was it. It was conveyed to us by the feds that it was to be taken as no more than a tip. That was it. So once we received his name, we set out about doing basically an independent verification of whether or not he was involved in this crime. Then page 15, line 16, question, I'm going to talk to you about a little bit more. But do you know why the FBI connected Brian Kohberger to the case? Line 19, so December 20th, if memory serves, we had a secondary meeting with the feds via Teams. If memory serves, they simply walked us through the family tree, how they did that. Now, I don't remember the details of all that. It was an in-depth conversation. That, to be honest, is above my head. But they essentially worked their way through and we go on to the next page, line 1, family tree, and arrived at a conclusion that Brian Kohberger was a person we should look into as a tip. So he continues to stress the fact that this was a tip, and they would then conduct, it appears, their independent investigation. Detective Payne, line 3, continues on, ladies and gentlemen. That's the extent of my knowledge of how they did that. Question, line 5. How was Brian Kohberger, the name you received as a tip, linked to the case? Answer, he wasn't until after December 19th. Line 8, what item of evidence did they link Brian Kohberger to? Answer, I'm not sure what you're asking. As far as before December 19th, is that what you're referring to? Question, yes. Answer, we didn't have one at that point. Question, why did you become interested in learning the identity of Brian Kohberger? Line 17, page 16. Answer, not quite sure I understand your question. We were interested in anyone who would have been involved in this. The DNA from the sheath was obviously the one thing we had that we thought was a very strong piece of evidence in this case. So it was that particular piece that we pursued as a potential avenue of identifying a suspect. Line 24, question, is it your understanding that the feds' work said that it was Brian Kohberger's DNA on the, and next page, sheath, line 1? Answer, that is not my understanding. Line 3, what is your understanding? Line 4, my understanding is that the feds concluded Brian Kohberger was a possible source of DNA that we should look into. They did not, to my knowledge, or at any point say Brian Kohberger's DNA is on the knife sheath. That was never conveyed to me. Line 9, on December 20th, this would have been the day after, ladies and gentlemen, they received the tip from the feds the evening of the 19th. So on December 20th, the next question says, when that happened, when he's somebody you should look into, what did you do? Line 12, we had already started looking into him from the previous evening. So that day, December 20th, we began going through basically our sort of standard investigative procedures that we had been doing throughout the investigation for various leads, to include basic DMV searches, NCIC offline returns, NCIC searches. We have a database called TLO, which is a credit-based search we use to find basic information. So we started doing all those things looking for information on Mr. Kohberger. Line 22, and what you found is that he didn't have a criminal history. Is that right? Line 24, correct. 25, talk to me about going to Pennsylvania. This is the bottom of 17 going into 18 for this trash pull. Line 2, well, I was not in Pennsylvania for the trash pull. Question, I'll ask somebody else that then. All right, so after you received Brian Kohberger's name and he hadn't been on your radar at all before, is that right? Answer, correct. All right, you had pursued interviews and surveillance video. Had you pursued evidence found inside the scene at 1122 King Road? Line 12, answer, yes, ma'am. What efforts did you make to pursue unknown male B? Line 15, answer, you have to be more specific. I don't remember exactly where unknown male B came from. Line 17, question, if I told you from the lab report showed unknown male B came from a blood spot on the handrail going between the second and first floor, does that help jog your memory? Answer, yes, ma'am. Why did you not pursue that person? Answer, at that point in time, we had already received Mr. Kohberger's name, and from my understanding was entering another DNA profile into CODIS, this top of the next page, line 1, would remove the previous one we had from the knife sheath. So if memory serves, the discussion will hold off. We'll stay with the one from the knife sheath. If we need to, we can address the unknown male B at a later time. Now we're learning here for the first time that this stain was not on the handrail going from 2 to 3. It was the handrail from 1 to 2. Interesting information, not before known. Question, I want to make sure I understand your testimony. Were you not aware of unknown male B until after December 19th when you knew Brian Kohberger's name? Answer, no, ma'am. I was aware of that before, yes. Question, how about unknown male D as in David? Answer, again, you're going to have to be more specific. Question, if I told you unknown male D came from a lab report from a sample of blood on some gloves outside the house, does that refresh your memory? Answer, line 18, yes, ma'am, it does. Question, you're aware of that too? Answer, yes, ma'am. I want to back up and talk about the affidavits. I think you told me in a prior hearing that you were the person that wrote Exhibit A, or the affidavit in support of the search warrants, when it came to looking for things about Brian Kohberger. Did I understand that right? And we're going into page 20, yes, ma'am. And that affidavit, when you began, was that on about December 23rd to get 2 records? Answer, as far as when I started writing the affidavit, is that what you're referring to? Question, the first search warrant that applies to Brian Kohberger. Answer, I believe it was December 23rd, yes. Question, when did you begin writing that affidavit? 12, line 12. Answer, I began writing that affidavit long before that. It had been a running affidavit because at the beginning of it, there's some walkthrough of the crime scene. There's numerous things. It was a living document, so we'll just add information to it. I'd say that document started, I don't know, couldn't give an exact time, a couple weeks prior to that, even before we knew Mr. Kohberger's name. Line 20, help me understand what parts were added after you knew Mr. Kohberger's name. Answer, well, to walk down the line best I can. So obviously there's the initial component, which is the crime scene, the testimony from the roommates. Then after that, it shifts to, I believe, the first, and it then goes on to the next page, page 22. Mention or the first component was that Brian Kohberger was pulled over by Corporal Duke on a traffic stop. He was also contacted by WSU police. His vehicle was run by WSU PD officers. Then after that, we included trying to walk down the thing without it in front of me. Then we included the vehicle information that was about the white Elantra. Then after that, we included his residence and that he hit LPRs, or his vehicle had been seen on LPRs between Moscow Pullman, and Pennsylvania. And then there was the component about where he lived in Pennsylvania. Line 13, page 21. Let's go back to that time before you started writing the traffic stop. That affidavit contains some information that you gained from other officers. Is that right? Line 17, page 21. Yes, ma'am. Question, line 18. Okay. And you didn't write large parts of the affidavit. Is that also right? Answer, I took a lot of language from experts and other officers and agents. That's correct. Line 22. Question, are you aware your affidavit, your living document, was claimed by other people as their own original document, not giving you credit, but claimed as their own? Are you aware of that? It's line 25. Going into the next page. Yes, ma'am. This is page 22. Question, are you aware? You probably know because Nicholas Balance was collated with you. Did the two of you continually work on language to satisfy what the prosecutor wanted to see for probable cause? Answer, yes, ma'am. Did you and Nicholas Balance produce a map to show a possible route of travel for your suspect? Yes, ma'am. Ms. Taylor, and Your Honor, I'm at the defendant's 1A. I can either put it up here or approach the court with the map. The court, this is Judge Hippler now speaking. Can I see what you're referring to? There's been a lot of Exhibit A's in this case. Just as housekeeping, you had mentioned you stipulated to the admission of, it sounds like a large chunk of records, 1,000 pages. Ms. Taylor, line 20, yes, Your Honor. It's the stack of exhibits that came behind the amended Frank's motion from the defense. Line 23, the court. This is Judge Hippler speaking, and you want me to search through that to find stuff that you want me to rely on. This is the bottom of page 22. We're going to continue on with the rest of Detective Payne's testimony in the next episode of this special IndieZone event. We've learned some information here for the very first time. We do have confirmation, number one, from Detective Payne that at no time before the 19th of December was Brian Kohberger, and this is 2022, on their radar. He wasn't a person of interest. He was not a suspect. And then we have confirmation that the blood that was found, that was talked about during the open hearing, that was found on the handrail from 1 to 2, and also the glove that it was located outside. And so these were named as unknown male, and then the initial was given. So we're going to continue on in our next episode. To read the transcript, please go to the link that I have provided in the description to this podcast episode. Please read it and join us for the next episode of this special series where we will continue to read the transcript, comment on it from the January 23rd closed hearing. This is Kathy. Thank you for joining us here today.